What would you do if a strange woman moved in next door and kept staring at you every single day? What would you do if you lived in a nearly abandoned neighborhood where only a few houses were occupied and the streets became completely silent at night, and the same woman suddenly rang your doorbell in the middle of the night? This is a true story that happened to me back in 2022, and even now, years later, I still can't fully explain what she really was. Before I tell you the nightmare itself, I should probably introduce myself first. At that time, I was still in college, but instead of living with my parents, I had already started working so I could become independent. My parents lived outside the city while I stayed alone near my college because it made life easier. I didn't own a car or even a bike, and traveling long distances every day using public transport had become exhausting for me. The small house I rented was located in a quiet residential area only a few minutes away from my college and workplace, so despite the loneliness, I actually liked living there. Everything remained normal until New Year of 2022, when a woman suddenly moved into the empty house next to mine. She looked around 23 or maybe 25 years old, and the first thing that immediately felt strange to me was the fact that someone so young, especially a woman, would choose to live completely alone in such an isolated neighborhood. She was beautiful in a strange way, but her face had noticeable acne scars, and there was a dark mark near the side of her head that I couldn't stop noticing. She had barely been there for a full day when I noticed something disturbing. That evening, while I was working on my laptop, I realized she had been standing in her kitchen for hours, just staring directly toward my house. She barely moved at all. At first, I tried to ignore it and continued doing my work until night came. Later that evening, around 9 p.m., I had to go collect a bank check, and by the time I returned home, it was nearly midnight. As I stood near my gate unlocking it, I suddenly remembered the woman and instinctively looked back toward her house, wondering if she was still standing there watching me. But this time, the kitchen was empty. I felt relieved and went inside. After eating dinner and freshening up, I walked into my kitchen to prepare snacks for a gaming session. And the moment I looked toward her house again, my entire body froze. She was standing there again in the exact same spot, staring directly at my house without moving. The sight of her terrified me far more than it should have. I quickly grabbed my snacks and rushed back into my room, trying to ignore the feeling in my chest. Around 2 a.m., I finally shut down my computer and decided to sleep. The next morning, I woke up early for work and left the house. When I returned in the afternoon, I checked her kitchen again while eating lunch, but this time she wasn't there. Seeing the empty window made me feel slightly better, and after eating, I accidentally fell asleep for much longer than intended. When I woke up again, it was already around 10 p.m. I washed my face and walked back toward the kitchen, and that's when I saw her standing outside near her front gate. The sight was horrifying. She was just standing there completely motionless while holding a birthday cake in her hands. She wasn't going anywhere. She was simply standing there in silence. Since I lived alone and the neighborhood became completely deserted at night, the image of her standing there under the dim streetlights made my heart race with fear. I immediately ran back into my bedroom and tried forcing myself to sleep so I could stop thinking about her. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fall asleep. Eventually, I got back on my computer and continued gaming just to distract myself. By the time I noticed the clock again, it was already 2 a.m. Finally, around 3 in the morning, just as I was beginning to relax, someone suddenly knocked on my gate. I froze instantly. Deep down, I already knew it was her. At that point, I had completely convinced myself that I needed to leave that house and either rent somewhere else or move back in with my parents because the woman next door genuinely felt mentally unstable. The knocking continued over and over until I finally gathered enough courage to slowly walk toward the gate. My hands were shaking the entire time. When I reached the entrance, I asked who was outside. A deep, heavy female voice answered, "It's me, your neighbor." The moment I heard her voice, I felt genuine terror crawl through my body. Part of me still hoped maybe she was simply awkward or lonely and that I was overreacting. Trying to stay calm, I slowly opened the gate, and there she was, standing there smiling while holding the cake. The smell coming from her was horrible, like something rotten. It reminded me of the smell of a dead animal trapped inside a room for days. I remembered she had arrived with several cats, maybe 3 or 4 of them, so I convinced myself the smell probably came from living with too many animals. Trying not to appear afraid, I asked her name and why she was standing outside my house so late at night. For a few seconds, she just stared at me silently while smiling. Then she finally said, "My name is Cassie. It's my birthday today, so I brought you cake." She explained that nobody lived with her, so she wanted to share it with someone nearby. To make me feel comfortable, she even ate one slice herself before offering the rest to me. I told her I also lived alone because my family stayed outside the city while I studied and worked nearby. The moment I said that, her smile widened slightly in a way that made me deeply uncomfortable. Still, I accepted the cake and placed it in the fridge after she left. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop wondering if the entire conversation had simply been her way of confirming whether I lived alone or not. But eventually, I convinced myself to think positively. Maybe she really was just lonely and socially awkward. The next day after work, I met one of my old college friends named Andrew. I told him everything that had been happening and explained that I was considering leaving the house. The moment he heard the story, he became concerned and immediately suggested I move out. He even offered to stay with me for a few days so I wouldn't have to remain alone there. I was honestly grateful for that. Later that night, we returned to the house together. By then, it was already around 11 p.m. The neighborhood was silent as always, and strangely, the woman wasn't standing in the kitchen window anymore. Andrew and I spent the night playing chess, eating snacks, and talking about old memories. Since we were college friends and gaming buddies, his company distracted me enough to finally feel relaxed again. Around 1 a.m., we decided to sleep, but before going to bed, I wanted to show him the woman myself. I brought him into the kitchen and pointed toward her house. At first, the kitchen window was empty, and Andrew started wondering if maybe the whole thing had simply become paranoia in my head. But only moments later, while we were still talking, I looked back toward the house. And there she was again, standing perfectly still in the kitchen window, staring directly toward us. This time, even Andrew went pale. He immediately believed everything I had told him. We rushed back into the bedroom and locked the door, deciding that the next morning we would leave that house permanently. Then suddenly, the gate bell rang again. Both of us froze in terror. Andrew whispered, "It's her." Even though we were both terrified, we slowly walked together toward the gate. Before opening it, I asked who was outside. Once again, it was her voice, but this time it sounded deeper somehow, almost unnatural. The moment I opened the gate, I saw something I will never forget for the rest of my life. Cassie was standing there smiling again, but now her eyes looked completely pale white, and in her hand, she was holding a knife. I instantly tried slamming the gate shut, but she forced her arm between the gate while making horrible growling sounds. Andrew and I pushed against the gate with all our strength until we finally managed to close it completely. I remember seeing stains on her clothes. Deep down, I truly believe she came there expecting me to be alone. We immediately called the police. When officers finally arrived outside the house, they found her lying lifeless directly beside our gate, with a knife nearby. The scene near the entrance was deeply disturbing. Later, they searched her house, and what they found inside made everything even worse. All of her cats were dead. Some were in a disturbing condition. Others showed clear signs that something was terribly wrong, and the smell inside the house was unbearable. Nobody could explain what was wrong with her. Some people believe she was mentally ill, but even now I still believe there was something deeply unnatural about that woman. Maybe something had happened to her in that house, especially since it had been empty for a long time. After that night, I left the neighborhood and moved back in with my parents. But even today, whenever I remember Cassie standing silently in that kitchen window, staring toward my house night after night, I still feel the same fear crawling back into my chest all over again.